Never thought I'd find myself here, but if I'm being honest, there was a time when everything felt perfect. My husband, Greg, and my sister used to get along like peas in a pod. That was before everything unraveled. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the sun was peeking through the curtains in the living room, casting long shadows on the floor. I was sitting on the couch, a hot cup of tea in my hands, eyes glued to the TV. The smell of freshly baked cookies still lingered in the kitchen, remnants of the lazy Sunday morning. My world, or what I thought was my world, felt safe, beautiful even. My husband sat beside me, looking relaxed, his arms stretched out over the back of the couch. So in the corner of the room, her pregnant belly sticking out like a perfectly round balloon, almost glowing with excitement. At least that's how it seemed. That's how we all thought it was. But you can only keep up appearances for so long before everything crumbles. It was hard to believe that the man sitting next to me, the one who'd promised to love me through everything, could ever do something that would shatter the perfect image you'd built. And my sister, my own flesh and blood, who had always been the innocent one, the one who could do no wrong, was about to make a decision that would push things too far. Fateful day, it started with something small, something stupid, really. Just a harmless disagreement. Who was several months pregnant was arguing with Greg. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, she was hormonal, and Greg, bless his heart, wasn't the best at handling her mood swings. But what I didn't see coming was the sheer rage that would flood his veins. Argument started over something ridiculous, something about the way Greg had arranged the chairs at the dining table for dinner. Had always been a perfectionist. She liked things done her way, and Greg, well, he couldn't care less. I could see the irritation building in his eyes as she lectured him about how his arrangement was all wrong. The words were sharp, pointed, and quick, never took a breath when she was upset. Greg, can't you ever do anything right? Snapped, her voice rising in frustration. Greg, who was never the type to argue back, let out a strained chuckle. Come on, Em, it's just a dining table, it doesn't have to be perfect. Well, maybe if you actually listened to me for once, things wouldn't always go wrong. She fired back, crossing her arms in defiance. At that moment, it felt like a small fight, one that would blow over like all the others. But I wasn't prepared for the shift in the air, the way the tension thickened in the room. Greg's jaw clenched. I knew that look. It was the look he wore when he was about to say something he would regret. I should stopped it then, should stepped in and told them to calm down, but I stayed silent. I watched as my husband turned to face, his eyes dark with frustration. Enough, Greg said, his voice low and steady. But wasn't having it. What, you think just because you're the man of the house I'm supposed to shut up and listen to you? No, Greg, not this time. Her words cut deeper than I realized. I could see Greg's fist ball up at his sides, his entire body tense like a cold spring. I wanted to speak, to stop it, but everything seemed to happen in slow motion, like the world was holding its breath. Just shut up already, Greg snapped, his voice rising. It was the anger in his voice that threw me off. I'd never heard him sound like that before, not to me, not to anyone. Thought for a moment that he might walk away, that he might just leave her to vent her anger. But no, he didn't leave. Instead, something inside of him snapped, something dark that I hadn't seen in years, something I hadn't known existed. Before I could even register what was happening, Greg lunged at her. My heart froze. He grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her, his grip tight and possessive. You don't talk to me like that, he growled through clenched teeth. Screamed, trying to push him away, but I was too slow. Eyes were wide with shock, her mouth open in disbelief. And then in one swift motion, Greg's hand pulled back, and without any hesitation, he punched square in the stomach. I'm stopped, my breath caught in my chest, and I felt like I was suffocating. The room was too quiet, too still, as the sound of Greg's fist making contact with his body echoed in my ears. Rushed toward her, pulling into my arms, trying to shield her from the chaos I couldn't control. Greg, what have you done? But it was too late, the damage was done. And that's when it hit me, this was just the beginning, the start of something much bigger, something darker. Sound of gas filled my ears as I held her close, my mind spiraling out of control. I couldn't believe what had just happened. The image of Greg's fist landing on her stomach was burned into my mind, and the weight of it crushed me. How had we gotten here? How had our once perfect family shattered so violently? But even in the chaos of that moment, my mind couldn't help but drift backward to the years before this eruption of anger and betrayal. It was in those quiet, hidden corners of our family history that the cracks first appeared. I'd always been the peacekeeper. The glue that held everything together was the baby of the family, and with her being the youngest, she was indulged in ways I never was. Growing up, our parents had always doted on her. She had a natural charm and innocence about her that made her the center of attention in every room she entered. I loved her, of course, but there were times when I couldn't help but resent how easily she won their affection. It wasn't that they didn't love me, but I'd always been the responsible one, the one who helped around the house, who listened to their advice, who did everything right. In contrast, seemed to get away with everything. I was the older sister, the one expected to be the role model, but was the one everyone laughed with, the one who got all the praise. Remember one night after a family dinner when I asked Mom about it? Why was it that could make mistakes and still be treated like a queen, while I was always held to a higher standard? 'Cause she's the baby, Mom had said with a laugh, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. You know how it is, we spoil the youngest one. Stung, but I had accepted it. It was the way things were. But what I couldn't accept was how Greg fell into the same trap. When we first met, Greg was the perfect gentleman. He adored. At first, I thought it was sweet, the way he would help her with her problems, the way he always put her first. But over time, I began to notice something disturbing. He had started to enable her, just like the rest of the family had. Never saw her as a grown woman, but as this fragile, perfect creature who could do no wrong. He catered to her whims, let her manipulate him with a smile. It was as though he saw her as someone who could do no wrong. She was his perfect little sister-in-law, the one who needed protection. And in doing so, he shielded her from the consequences of her actions, actions that slowly began to affect our marriage. For years, I'd let it slide. I thought it was normal, but the tension began to build between us. Complaints about me not being good enough for Greg were constant. She'd make sly comments about how he could have done better, and Greg, instead of defending me, would brush it off with a nervous laugh. Oh, Em, you know how she is, he'd say. She's just trying to be perfect all the time. Wasn't trying to be perfect, I was trying to make things work. But every time I asked for space, every time I needed Greg to be on my side, he was lost in his web. She had a way of drawing people to her, and Greg was no exception. She had become the center of his world, even in ways I didn't fully understand. Last few months before the incident were especially tense. His pregnancy had made her even more self-centered, more demanding. I tried to be supportive, to be happy for her, but it was hard to stay positive when I saw Greg spend every waking hour with her. Every time I brought up something I needed, some way to fix our home or our relationships, voice would cut me off. Oh, Greg, don't listen to her, she would say. She's just being dramatic, you know I can't handle stress right now. And Greg, instead of telling her that I needed his support too, would always say, yeah, you're right, we should let her calm down. I was invisible, I felt like I was losing him, and it terrified me, but I couldn't compete with the image of perfection that had created for herself. She was the one with the baby, the one Greg wanted to protect. In a way, I became the outsider. At night after the punch, after everything shattered, I began to question it all. Was I the one who had failed? Had I allowed the distance between Greg and me to grow? Was I too independent, too cold, while was the emotional one the one who needed his protection? It was then that I realized something truly frightening. Greg didn't just see as his sister-in-law. He saw her as a vulnerable, fragile thing, someone he needed to rescue, even if it meant compromising his own integrity, even if it meant sacrificing me. That idea, that belief that he could fix everything for her, had become so deeply ingrained that I was nothing but a shadow in our own home. In the days that followed the incident, everything felt off. The world I had known, the world where I thought I was in control, had shifted completely. It was like waking up from a nightmare only to find that the nightmare was real and I was stuck in it. Kid apologized, of course. His remorse was palpable, a desperate attempt to undo the damage he had caused. But no apology could erase what had happened, not the bruise left on stomach or the scar left on our family. The truth was, I was scared. I was scared of what Greg had become, of what had become, and of what I had allowed myself to become. Days dragged on, and I tried to keep the peace. I cleaned the house, made dinner, did everything I could to maintain the facade of a normal life. But every time Greg walked into the room, I felt a lump form in my throat. I couldn't look at him the same way. The man I had married, the man I had trusted, had hit my sister. He had crossed a line, and I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. One evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall when Greg came in. His eyes were tired, his face drawn with exhaustion. He had been working long hours, and I could see the stress piling up in the lines of his face. Are you okay? He asked, his voice soft. His tone was almost pleading, as though he were searching for a way to make things right. Looked up at him, my heart aching. I wanted to tell him everything, how hurt I was, how broken our marriage felt, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just nodded. I'm fine, Greg, I just need some space. Greg sat down across from me, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. I'm sorry, I know I messed up, I shouldn't have hit her, I don't know what came over me, I swear I love you. You love me? I said, the words feeling foreign on my lips. You love me, but you hit my sister, you physically hurt her. What do you think that says about our relationship, about you? Words stung, but they were the truth. I needed him to understand, needed him to see that his actions weren't just a mistake, they were a betrayal. But Greg's face softened and his eyes filled with tears. I was thinking, it was like I blacked out, I swear, he said, his voice trembling. She was so aggressive and I didn't know how to deal with it. I've never been so angry in my life. Anger doesn't excuse violence, Greg, I replied, my voice shaking. You don't get to hurt someone just because you're mad. His face twisted in guilt and he reached across the table, taking my hand in his. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, please let me make it right. But as he held my hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about one moment of anger. This wasn't about a single mistake. Something had shifted between us, something deeper than I could articulate. Greg had crossed a line, one that I wasn't sure could ever be uncrossed. Needed answers, but I wasn't sure I could handle the truth. There were so many things I didn't understand, things I had chosen to ignore. Why did Greg protect so fiercely? Why did he seem so willing to cater to her every whim, even at the cost of our marriage? And what about, why had she provoked him so much? Was she really as innocent as she claimed to be? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was standing at the edge of something much bigger than just a physical altercation. This was about power, control, and manipulation. It wasn't just about Greg losing his temper, it was about the dynamic between him and a dynamic I had failed to see for so long. The next day I sat down with, I couldn't ignore it anymore. We needed to talk. I needed to understand her side of things, to know what had really happened in the moments before Greg lost control. We need to talk, I said when she walked into the living room, her face as tired as mine. What is it now, huh? You're mad at me for being pregnant? I know I've been demanding, but Greg been too, she replied, folding her arms over her swollen belly. Shook my head. This isn't about the pregnancy, Em. This is about what happened. You pushed him too far, and I need to understand why. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. What do you mean why? He's always been this way. He's always been a pushover, always been weak. You know that. I'm just trying to make sure he stands up for himself. Getting in his face and provoking him, I shot back, my frustration mounting. You have no idea how much damage you've done. You keep pushing him and it's tearing us apart. She looked away, her expression shifting. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted him to hit me? I didn't ask for this, okay? But you have no idea what it's like being the baby of the family, being the one who's always treated like I'm fragile. You don't know what it's like to feel like no one sees you, no one cares. Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but it was what I needed to hear. It wasn't just the spoiled, manipulative sister I had come to resent. She was struggling too. She was trapped in her own role, suffocated by the expectations placed on her, just as I had been suffocated by the pressure of being the responsible one. Not excusing what Greg did, she continued, her voice softening. But maybe I just wanted someone to care enough to stand up for me, and Greg, he always does that, but he's always been afraid of you, he's always been afraid of what you'll think. Her words were a dagger in my heart. I had never realized how much my own actions had affected them both. I had been so focused on keeping everything together that I hadn't seen the cracks forming beneath the surface. I had been blind. Days after my conversation with felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest, but I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling of dread. There were truths I wasn't ready to face, truths that had been buried for so long. I had asked myself over and over, why did it take a physical confrontation for me to finally see the depth of the dysfunction in my family? Tension in the house grew thicker with every passing day. I wanted to believe that things could go back to normal, that Greg's remorse and subtle admissions could bring some kind of peace, but the reality was far from it. There was no going back, not after what had happened. It was 2 days after that conversation, a Wednesday, and the air in the house felt heavy. It was as if everything around me was holding its breath, waiting for the next spark, the next explosion. I had been trying to keep myself busy, cleaning, cooking, doing anything to avoid thinking too much. But as evening rolled in, the unease that had been building finally reached a breaking point. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone when I heard it, the sound of raised voices from the kitchen. At first, I thought it was just another petty argument between Greg and another spat over something small, but then I heard the words clearly and they sent a shiver down my spine. You always do this? You think just because you're pregnant, you get to control everything? Greg's voice cracked with frustration. I'm not controlling anything, Greg. You're the one who always gives in to her. She doesn't even see how you're ruining our lives. Voice rose, sharp and cutting. Stood up, my pulse quickening. This wasn't a small disagreement. This was something bigger, something darker, something that I wasn't prepared for. I rushed to the kitchen, hoping to intervene before things escalated again. When I reached the doorway, I froze. What I saw made my stomach churn. He had his hands on his arms, shaking her, his face twisted in anger. She was trying to push him away, her face flushed with frustration, her hands weakly batting at his chest. But it was the way Greg's eyes were wild, like he wasn't really seeing her, like he wasn't in control, that terrified me. I could see the rage building in his body the same way it had before the punch. I knew that look, and I knew what was coming. Greg, stop right now, I yelled, rushing forward, my heart pounding in my chest. Greg's eyes snapped to me, but they weren't filled with remorse this time. They were filled with something else: anger, confusion, desperation. Don't you see she's driving me insane? He shouted, his voice rising. She's always manipulating me, always pushing me to the edge, and I can't take it anymore. Greg, calm down, she's pregnant. I pleaded, stepping in between them, my hands raised in a desperate attempt to separate them, but it was too late. In his rage, Greg shoved me back, his hand hard against my chest. I stumbled backward, barely catching myself on the edge of the kitchen counter. Don't touch her, screamed, her face a mask of shock and hurt. She was shaking, her eyes wide with fear. Could barely process what had just happened. Greg had never touched me like that, not before, not ever, and to see him do it now in front of me shattered something inside of me. It wasn't just about the violence, it was about the betrayal. Turned to Greg, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. You hit me after everything that happened with you hit me. I didn't mean to, I didn't, Greg started, but I cut him off. Oh, you did mean to, you didn't care, you never care. My words felt like daggers, sharp and unforgiving. Greg looked lost, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. I didn't know what to do, I didn't know how to make it stop. You don't understand, she just keeps pushing me, you're both always pushing me. Step back, my hands shaking. I felt sick to my stomach, caught between the two people I loved most in the world, but who had both betrayed me in ways I didn't know how to fix. You don't get to say that, Greg. You don't get to use me as an excuse for what you did, I said, my voice low and steady, the hurt pooling deep inside of me. You're responsible for your own actions, and what you did to me, it's unforgivable. And then, as if the universe had decided to throw salt in the wound, the sound of gasping caught my attention. I turned to see her clutching her stomach, her face pale, her hand trembling. I think something's wrong, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Heart stopped, the air in the room seemed to disappear. I rushed to her side, ignoring everything else, focusing only on, what's wrong, are you okay? I don't know, I am hurting, she said, her face contorting in pain as she slowly sank to the floor. Greg and I both moved toward her, but I could see the panic in his eyes now. This wasn't about anger anymore. This was about something much more terrifying. I think we need to go to the hospital, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, but I could feel my own fear rising. We need to get you checked out. Odded, tears streaming down her face as she held her stomach. The moment I saw that, I knew that this was no longer just a family fight. This was real. And whatever had happened in that kitchen, whatever had snapped between Greg and had now put her life and the life of her baby in jeopardy. Greg didn't hesitate. We all rushed to the car, the air thick with silence. I couldn't help but replay the moment in my mind, the push, the slap, the way he'd thrown me aside. It was like watching someone you love drown in their own demons. The guilt, the shame, it was all consuming. And as we drove to the hospital, I had one thought. Wouldn't her baby be okay? Would we all survive what had just happened? Was it too late to save everything? Hospital emergency room was a blur of sterile white lights and the hum of machinery, but none of it mattered. All that mattered was my sister, the woman who had been the center of our family's universe for as long as I could remember, was in pain. She clutched her stomach as the nurses rushed her into the exam room, her breath shallow and quick, her face pale with fear. Again, I stood there, the weight of what had just happened hanging heavy between us. I could barely look at him. The man who was supposed to protect her had been the one to hurt her. The man who promised me he would never cross a line had just shattered everything with a single punch. As the doctor led us into the examination room, I could see the worry on his face. We need to get an x-ray done, he said briskly, motioning for her to lie down on the bed. We need to make sure there's no internal damage to the baby, and we'll check for any bruising or injury to your abdomen. Nodded silently, tears streaming down her face, and I wanted to reach out to comfort her, but I couldn't. Not after what had happened. I was torn between my sister, who was hurt and vulnerable, and Greg, who was standing just behind me, silent and broken. As they prepared her for the x-ray, I turned to Greg, my voice a low whisper. What the hell were you thinking? How could you do that? You didn't just hurt, you hurt our entire family. Do you even realize what you've done? I flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I was angry, furious at him for what he'd done, and I wasn't about to hold back. This isn't just about you losing your temper, Greg. You put her life and her baby's life in danger. What if something's wrong? What if the baby's hurt because of what you did? I didn't mean it. I didn't want to hurt her. Greg's voice cracked, and he reached out for my arm, but I pulled away. I don't care what you meant. It doesn't matter, I snapped, my voice thick with emotion. The damage is done. Greg's eyes filled with tears, and he seemed to shrink in front of me, his hands trembling. Please, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what was happening. I've been so lost. You've been lost, Greg. I shook my head in disbelief. You've been lost. It's been here all along, and you're the one who's lost. Do you even know what that sounds like? Do you even understand what you've done? Words poured out of me, unstoppable, like a floodgate that had been opened, but then's voice, faint and weak, cut through the tension. Eyes, can we just? Her voice broke, and she winced as the pain hit her again. Please just stop fighting. This isn't helping. Turned to look at her, her hand clutching her stomach. I swallowed the lump in my throat, knowing that in this moment nothing mattered more than her well-being. She had been caught in the middle of our chaos, and I hated that for her. Walked over to her side, gently taking her hand in mine. We're here, Em. I'm here. Whatever happens, we'll get through this. Greg, still standing behind me, nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving. His guilt was evident, but I wasn't sure that was enough. Guilt didn't undo the damage. Guilt didn't take back what had been done. Doctor returned with the results of the x-rays, his face serious. There's good news and bad news, he said, looking at both and me. The baby seems to be fine, no internal injuries. However, there is some bruising around her abdomen. It'll be painful, but it looks like nothing that can't heal. We'll keep her overnight for observation, but it's likely that everything will be okay. Let out the breath I didn't know I had been holding. On the other hand, just nodded, her eyes closed in exhaustion. Thank God, she whispered, the relief flooding through her voice. But as I looked at Greg, I could see that the relief was not shared. His face was ashen, his eyes haunted. He didn't know how to react to the news. He had put so much of himself into the moment of crisis that he hadn't considered what would come next. Thank you, doctor, I said, forcing a smile even though my heart was still heavy. Can we stay with her tonight? The doctor nodded. Of course, we'll monitor her throughout the night and you can stay in the room with her. As he left the room, I turned to Greg again. You need to leave. His face dropped, and for a moment I thought he was going to argue, but then his shoulders slumped and he nodded. I know, I deserve that. I deserve more than that. Greg turned to leave, his footsteps heavy, the weight of everything we had been through between us. Stayed with that night, holding her hand, making sure she was comfortable, but it wasn't the same anymore. The night was quiet, but there was an underlying tension that I couldn't shake. Even with the good news, the sense of unease remained, hanging over us like a dark cloud. Stayed by her side for hours, watching as she fell in and out of sleep. I wasn't sure how I felt about her anymore. Was I angry at her for pushing Greg so far? Yes, but she was my sister and I couldn't help but feel guilty for not protecting her from all of this. I had let it happen, we had all let it happen. Eventually, I left the hospital, unable to stay any longer, but before I did, I had one last conversation with Greg. Are you going to try to fix this, Greg, or are we just going to pretend that everything's fine? I asked, my voice hard. Greg didn't respond immediately, his gaze distant. I don't know how to fix it, but I'm going to try. I swear to you, I don't want to lose you. But even as he said the words, I wasn't sure if he meant them or if I could even believe him. What had happened that day? Could we ever really go back to the way things were? Hospital room felt colder as the hours dragged on. Even though it was stable and her baby was seemingly safe, the weight of everything that had transpired still loomed over us. I couldn't escape it, couldn't forget the image of Greg's fist landing on stomach. It was haunting, like a scar etched into the very fabric of my family. Had spent the night at the hospital with, but now the silence between us was almost unbearable. Had asked me to leave the room a few times, needing her own space, but I couldn't. I needed to be there, needed to make sure she was okay. And yet in my mind, I was torn between my loyalty to my sister and the devastating truth about my marriage. It was early the next morning when I finally left the hospital to get some air. The walk through the sterile halls felt suffocating. I wasn't sure what to do. I wasn't sure if I wanted to confront Greg or run away from him entirely. I had to talk to someone who could understand, someone who would tell me the truth, no matter how painful. That's when I called Rachel. She had been my best friend since childhood, and she had always been a voice of reason in my life. She was someone who could see the situation for what it truly was, without the filter of family loyalty. Rachel answered on the second ring, her voice groggy but full of concern. What's going on? You sound off. I don't know what to do anymore, I said, my voice cracking as I walked out into the cool morning air. Greg hit, and I can't get past it. I don't know how to move forward. I don't know if I can ever forgive him. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Rachel's voice, steady and serious, came through. I've been waiting for you to call me. You can't ignore this. This isn't just about a one-time mistake. This is about a pattern, about the way Greg has treated you and the way he's treated. I know that now, I whispered, guilt and anger swirling inside me. But he's sorry, Rachel. He's really sorry. He wants to fix things. He says he's going to try. It's not enough, Rachel said firmly. Sorry doesn't undo the damage. You need to think about what's best for you and for this isn't just about whether or not you can forgive him. It's about whether or not he's going to change. And from what I'm hearing, he's not ready to change. He's still making excuses, still blaming for pushing him. This isn't just about him losing control. It's about him not taking responsibility. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. So what am I supposed to do, Rachel? Just give up on everything? Give up on my marriage, on my family? Oh, she replied softly. But you need to face the truth. You can't keep pretending that everything's okay. You need to stop enabling him. You need to make him face the consequences of his actions, no matter how hard that is. Felt the sting of her words, but they were the truth. I had spent so much time trying to hold everything together, trying to ignore the cracks in my marriage, the things I didn't want to see. But Rachel was right. I couldn't keep pretending. As I walked back into the hospital, my mind was made up. I needed to confront Greg. I needed to hear the truth from him, no matter how ugly it was. Found him sitting in the waiting room, his head down, his hands clasped together tightly. He looked small, broken, and utterly defeated. His eyes lifted when I entered, but there was no confidence in his gaze, just guilt and fear. I need to talk to you, Greg, I said, my voice low but firm. He stood up immediately, the fear in his eyes deepening. Please, I know I messed up. I swear to you, I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Just tell me what you need and I'll do it. You don't get to apologize your way out of this, I replied, my anger rising again. I need you to tell me the truth. What happened that night? Why did you lose control? What were you thinking when you hit her? Rick's face crumpled, his eyes filling with tears as he sat back down. I don't know. She was yelling at me and it felt like she was just attacking me. I couldn't take it anymore. I don't know what happened. I just snapped. Snapped? I repeated, my voice incredulous. Greg, this isn't just about a moment of anger. You've been enabling her, making excuses for her for years, and when things got tough, you lost control. You hurt me, and you need to face that. You need to take responsibility. Rick's face flushed with shame, and he looked away. I'm not proud of what I did. I know it was wrong. I can't undo it, but I want to fix it. I don't want to lose you. I can't lose you. Shook my head, tears welling in my eyes. I don't know if I can stay with you, Greg. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. You don't just hit someone once and expect everything to be okay. He reached out to me, his hand trembling. Please don't leave me. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll work on myself. I'll do whatever it takes. Wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that things could go back to normal. But deep down, I knew that we were standing at a crossroads and I had a choice to make. I could either keep living in this toxic cycle or I could take the hard step of confronting the truth and choosing what was best for me, for my family. You need to prove it to me, Greg, I said, my voice resolute. You need to show me that you're serious. This isn't just about saying sorry. This is about real change. Greg nodded, his face desperate. I will, I swear I will. I'll do whatever it takes. But as I walked away from him, the weight of everything we had been through settled in my chest. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive him. I wasn't sure if I could ever go back to the life we had before. But what I did know, what I knew deep in my soul, was that this was a turning point. This was the moment when everything could change. This was the moment when I had to decide what I was willing to live with and what I was. Weeks that followed were a blur of emotions. I wish I could say that things returned to normal, that Greg and I somehow miraculously healed from the wounds that had been inflicted, both physical and emotional. But the truth was, nothing about the aftermath was easy. Nothing about this journey was simple or clean. Spent days agonizing over what to do. My mind raced with questions. Could I still love Greg? Could I ever trust him again? And what about how could I ever truly reconcile with her, knowing that in her quest for attention, she had pushed our lives to the breaking point? How could I heal from the betrayal of my husband's violence, my sister's manipulations, and the hollow feeling that had consumed me for so long? Turning point came after several tense days. Greg had promised me he would go to therapy, that he was committed to changing, and to my surprise, he kept his word. He started attending counseling, and I reluctantly agreed to join him a few weeks later. First, therapy felt like a lifeline, a way to untangle the mess of emotions that had built up between us. But even in those sessions, there was an elephant in the room, the deep scar from what had happened. Every time Greg spoke about his feelings, I heard the undercurrent of guilt. Every time cried, I saw the vulnerability in her eyes, but also the frustration. We were all trying to find our way back to something, but none of us knew what that something was anymore. But as I listened to Greg in therapy, slowly opening up about his childhood, about his inability to express emotions, about the pressure he had always felt to be the protector of his family, something clicked inside of me. I had spent so long blaming him for the things he did wrong that I hadn't stopped to think about the reasons behind his actions. I had been so angry, so hurt, that I never bothered to ask why. Through the therapy sessions, Greg revealed the truth about how he had always been conditioned to believe that men didn't show vulnerability, that their worth was measured by how much they could handle. It wasn't an excuse for what he had done, but it was a clue. I could see now that Greg wasn't a monster. He had simply been struggling with demons of his own, ones he had never learned to confront. Then it wasn't just Greg who needed to heal, it was her too. After everything had happened, started opening up to me more. She admitted that she had pushed Greg to the edge not out of malice, but because she didn't know how to handle the loneliness and isolation she felt during her pregnancy. The constant need for attention, the manipulation, the anger, it had all stemmed from a deep insecurity that she had never acknowledged. She had been drawing in her own emotions, just like Greg had been drawing in his. It was a painful realization. We had both been complicit in the cycle, feeding off each other's vulnerabilities and weaknesses, too caught up in our own pain to see the bigger picture. First few weeks were the hardest. Greg and I had long conversations, some of them calm, others filled with raw emotion. There were times when I wanted to throw in the towel when I couldn't see a way forward, but there were also moments when I saw a glimmer of the man I had once loved, the man who was willing to fight for change, even if it meant facing the darkest parts of himself. But the healing process was a different journey. It wasn't just about apologizing, it was about understanding the damage she had caused. She had been so focused on getting what she wanted, on being seen, that she hadn't realized the impact her actions had on me, on Greg, and on our family. It wasn't easy for her, but with time and a willingness to face her own fears and insecurities, she started to change as well. Dell began the slow process of rebuilding, of learning to communicate in ways we never had before. It wasn't easy, there were setbacks. There were moments when old habits crept back in, when we each wanted to retreat into the safety of our old roles, the perfect sister, the perfect husband, the perfect family. But little by little, we chipped away at the walls we had built around ourselves. Months later, I could feel a shift in my marriage. It wasn't perfect, not by any means, but it was real. Greg had kept his promise to work on himself. He attended therapy regularly and started opening up about his struggles in ways he had never done before, and I too had to admit that I wasn't without my own flaws. I had let the resentment fester, let the silence between us grow until it was suffocating. I had to learn to listen, to truly listen, and not just to react. Two began to rebuild her relationship with Greg. It wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, is never fully restored, but they started taking small steps to rebuild their bond, to communicate in healthier ways. And though it was difficult, we all tried to learn from the mistakes we had made. Incident that had once seemed like the end of everything, like a wound too deep to heal, had in some twisted way become a catalyst for change. It forced us to face truths we had been avoiding for years. It made us confront the pain, the anger, and the resentment that had been brewing beneath the surface for far too long. In the months that followed, we began to heal. Greg and I started rebuilding our relationship brick by brick, and I started finding our way back to each other too, no longer trapped in the cycle of rivalry and hurt. And while there would always be scars, both physical and emotional, they were a reminder of where we had been and how far we had come. In the end, the blessing that came from that horrible moment wasn't just the physical safety of and her baby. It was the awakening that followed, the awakening to the fact that healing begins with honesty, accountability, and a willingness to change. As for Greg and me, we're still working on it. There's no perfect ending, no fairy tale solution, but I've learned that sometimes the darkest moments in our lives can lead to the possibilities, and maybe, just maybe, we'll come out of this stronger than we were before.